a brief clip that we have of General Motors sent to us by General Motors, and I think they might be wanting to play that for your benefit. Please. That was sent to us by General Motors, and we thought it would be a good one to play. The World Health Organization, just like the World Trade Organization, I'm telling you, I call them, they have been treating the United States for decades so badly, and they've been so in favor of China. China took off when it joined the World Trade Organization because of what's happened. Think of it. They're considered a developing nation, and because they're and we're not. Well, we're a developing nation, too, in my book, okay? We're developing, too. And we don't want to be the suckers anymore. The Senate has left Washington until at least May 4th. The Constitution provides a mechanism for the president to fill positions in such circumstances. The recess appointment, it's called. We have many, many positions that are unstaffed because we can't get the approvals. The Democrats are holding us up. We cannot get approval. But every week, they put up roadblocks. Whether it's Russia, or whether it's impeachment hoax, if the House will not agree to that adjournment, I will exercise my constitutional authority to adjourn both chambers of Congress.
On your threat to adjourn Congress, clearly you have the power, Article 2, Section 3, but that'd be quite radical to do. Earlier last month, you were in the oath of office, talked about now is not the time for partisanship. How will that act lower the partisanship in this town, and could it potentially hinder your ability to get something done on coronavirus?
Well, it is. Look, it's been a very partisan government for a long period of time, not just this administration. You can go back into the last two administrations. You've seen a lot of partisanship.
Timeline for that, though. If Congress doesn't act by when, do you have a date?
They know. They've been warned, and they're being warned right now. If they don't approve it, then we're going to go this route. And we'll probably be challenged in court, and we'll see who wins.
You mentioned the possibility of adjourning both chambers of Congress. Could you explain what you meant by that, sir?
Very simple. If they don't act on getting these people approved that we need, we need them anyway, but we especially need now because of the pandemic, we are going to do something that will be something I'd prefer not doing, but which I should do, and I will do if I have to.
So, Jim, talk about what the president is threatening to do to Congress, because I didn't really mention it at this point, because to me it just seems like such an obvious and overused move by the president, which is, terrible death toll today, divert attention away from that and all the things that aren't being done or have been failed to do by lobbing a hand grenade or trying to create some new villains to rail against and pretend as if you're going to be powerful and strong.
Right, Anderson. I think today the bright, shiny object that the president was dangling in front of the press corps in the Rose Garden was this little-known part of the Constitution that he says would allow him to essentially unilaterally shut down the Congress so he can get his recess appointments for various nominations that he's seen languishing up on Capitol Hill. The problem with that, Anderson, is a couple of things. One is it's never been done before, and so there are constitutional scholars who are saying, hold on a second, Mr. President, what are you talking about here? The other thing is that it also depends on what happens in the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans, and the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, just put out a statement in the last several minutes, essentially sounding cool to the idea. In one part of this statement, Anderson, the Senate Majority Leader says he's going to be working on some of these issues in terms of the president's recess appointments that he'd like to see go through, but he's going to be doing that with, working with the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. And so it sounds as if at this point Mitch McConnell is not on board with this, which probably should give a lot of Americans reason to breathe a sigh of relief tonight, Anderson.
Right. I mean, because he's the president, we all take it seriously as if it actually means something, but it's just like him saying he's going to order the governors and he's the one who determines when to reopen. As we were saying, that's not his role. He doesn't have that constitutional ability, but he dominates the news cycle for yet another night by this, headline that he's going to adjourn Congress in the middle of the pandemic to appoint his nominees. I mean, do the bulk of these appointments have anything to do with the urgent needs during the pandemic?
Well, he is mentioning the Director of National Intelligence. He has an acting Director of National Intelligence right now. But Anderson, he was also harping on the Broadcasting Board of Governors and talking about the people over at Voice of America and describing them as disgusting people who do disgusting things. This is another sign of the president's authoritarianism that is really coming out, out of the shadows to some extent during this pandemic. He is essentially railing against the people at Voice of America because they won't put out propaganda about his administration, saying what a wonderful job he's doing, a theme that we've heard before. But Anderson, one thing we should point out is that right now there's an acting secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. The president has had over a year now to put in place a permanent Secretary of Homeland Security, and he hasn't done that at this point, and that has little to do with lawmakers not doing what he wants up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Jim Acosta, appreciate it. Thanks. As we said at the top, a lot to get to tonight, so we'll step away from the political and take a wider view. CNN's Erica Hill joins us now. So, Erica, the CDC now changing the way they're counting coronavirus deaths. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, they are. So now, Anderson, the CDC saying they're going to include probable cases in their tabulations. That could add thousands, right, to the list that they have of patients and deaths. So what it changes is not just counting those positive cases, but people who had a probable case. And that's key, as we know, as we try to understand the breadth and the scope of this virus. How many people have been not only affected, but how many people may have been asymptomatic or may not have had a positive test. And all of that information is critical, we're hearing from officials, as they make their decision on the next moves to reopen their states and their cities.
Joining us now, CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta. So, Sanjay, the president is saying that the country probably passed the peak. What does that mean really for people's everyday lives, if that's in fact the case?
Yeah, I don't think it really means anything now. I think people have really paid a lot of attention to this peak and sort of imagined it as a binary sort of before the peak, after the peak. We're going to have to see, does these trends that we're talking about, do they hold up? Some of them are encouraging, as you know, Anderson. But the problem is that right now we're looking at a snapshot that really reflects the time period about 2 to 3 weeks ago, between the time someone is exposed to the time they become symptomatic. A small percentage go to the hospital, even smaller percentage die. If we're looking at deaths, it really reflects 3 weeks ago. So we really have to see how the next few weeks go. And Anderson, you remember those initial models that people pay a lot of attention to from University of Washington. They talked about, even if the peaks were happening now, that nothing should really change, at least until the end of May, first week of June, in terms of stay-at-home orders.
And business leaders tell the president that there have to be, guaranteed increase in testing before people really can return to work. How close are we to wide-scale testing? Because I'm still not sure I understand what it's going to look like. And, you and I have tried to get numbers on the number of people needed to do contact tracing. And, we've heard figures of 100,000. And the governor today said it would require an army of people in New York doing contact tracing.
Yeah, no, the testing thing is still, I think the primary issue. And I think what's a little confusing about this is that I think clearly there's all this extra now testing capacity. You talk to Quest and people at these big companies and they say, hey, we're doing all right. We don't have a backlog anymore. We're basically caught up. And yet the number of tests that are actually being performed has gone down. Now, some of that could be because of the holiday weekend, but how could it be that so many people still need to get tested and fewer tests are actually being performed? Where's the gap here? What's the problem? Part of it is, I think, it's still unclear that people who don't have symptoms should be getting tested. Right now, there's places that say unless you have symptoms, you can't get a test. That's not surveillance at that point. We need to be doing surveillance. The other thing is that even though the numbers have gone up, Anderson, I think the question that people ask themselves that I hear all the time is, look, if today I wanted to get a test, do I know where to go? Do I know how to get it? And could I get the results back today? Could every person in the country say that? It doesn't mean that everybody needs to get tested, to be clear. But right now, even though you have increased numbers, so to speak, there's not an increased practical availability of the test to the people who really should be getting tested. We probably need to be doing, 750 to 1 million tests a day for a period of time to really get that surveillance. We're not doing that. I think we've done 3.3 million so far now.
When you talk about surveillance, why is that important?
surveillance is really important to get an idea of how widespread this is in the United States. If someone were to say, how bad is coronavirus in the United States? We really have no idea how to answer that question. We have no context for that question still, because we've only, we've had 619,000 people come back positive, but we know that there's many, many more people out there who either don't have symptoms or have minimal symptoms, who probably have had the coronavirus or have it now and could still be spreading it. The other issue is Anderson, this issue of asymptomatic spread. People who don't have symptoms or are about to develop symptoms, don't know it yet, they can still spread it. That's another reason you have to do this this more widespread testing.
Yeah. Sanjay, I appreciate it as always. Thank you very much. Sanjay, do you ever sleep?
A little bit, not as much as I should. I'm not practicing what I preach right now.
Well, we appreciate it.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
At a time when most New Yorkers are staying home, this warehouse is bustling with workers. They once made signs and displays for major fashion houses, but now they have a new job, producing face shields used by medical personnel treating coronavirus patients. Their boss, Mike Dugal, couldn't be prouder.
There's government programs for people who are unemployed. Everyone's making a choice right now, and they're making a choice to come here and do something to help our first responders who are doing amazing things.
Less than 1 week after the mayor put out a desperate call for supplies, Dugal and partner Bednark were shipping their first order.
It is inspiring to see how quickly people figured out a way to do something that was needed, and not just do it in a small way, but do it in a very big way.
Dugal is one of several companies at this industrial complex alone that's retooled its operation in response to the coronavirus. Now the city wants to produce test kits locally as well as protective gear.
Experts say millions more tests will be needed to make sure it's safe for everyone to go back to work and school. This lab in Indiana donated 50,000 to New York hospitals. Now it's under contract to sell that many per week to the city and is helping to establish more local production facilities.
If you template this across the country to a couple major cities, this country can very, very, very easily make a couple million of these swabs and kits a week.
Working in the midst of a pandemic does require precautions, like these temperature checks when employees show up to work. Most say they're thankful to still have a paycheck.
In addition to just not wanting to spend time at home and be, idle, it's so nice to be able to give back.
Giving back and getting by, but hardly business as usual. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
If you're struggling with lockdown, perhaps take inspiration from 99-year-old Tom Moore. His days in isolation are motivated by helping others. With the aid of his walking frame, he's steadily making laps of the garden to raise money for NHS workers. But the speed of donations has left him stunned.
When it started off, we didn't think it'd go anywhere at all. It was just a little family affair. But then when it started to take off, I think we were all amazed. I couldn't believe, and we still can't believe.
As we film, a call comes in for Tom and his daughter Hannah to appear on an American radio station. Tom's fundraising has gone global.
As a global nation, we're looking for something to hold us together, and magically this has become it. Not exactly what we set out to do, but we're now sharing this with the whole world. This is the world's story, not ours.
Tom says the NHS looked after him when he had skin cancer and a broken hip. Now, with the body they helped keep going into old age, he wants to repay what the NHS did for him.
The difference that this is making is firstly, it's going straight to the front line of the NHS, the staff, the volunteers, the patients, and supporting them. So creating rest and recuperation centres for staff. It's buying electronic devices like iPads for patients who are isolated to be able to speak to their families and friends.
During the Second World War, Tom served in the army in Burma and India. His wartime stoicism is still evident, and his optimism is proving uplifting in these dark times.
We've never had anything quite like this before. We've suffered with wars, but this is it's a global thing, and as we said before, it's invisible. It's something you can't get out and thump it and do anything like that. You've got to, as all the medical people are doing their best to get through, and we will get through. That I think everybody got to remember, we will get through eventually.
Heading in for a well-earned rest, Tom says he'll continue making laps of the garden just as long as people keep sponsoring him. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Bedfordshire.
As the coronavirus pandemic claims hundreds more victims, ministers have sought to address the deep concerns around the situation in care homes in England. They've now promised a new testing regime for both residents and staff, and for anyone being discharged from hospital to a care home. But the announcement has prompted a series of questions about how realistic the plans are, given the slow progress on testing in the NHS, which is still nowhere near the government's official target of 100,000 tests a day. Now, the latest official figures for the UK show that there were 761 deaths reported in the last 24-hour period. It means that so far the official number of deaths in the UK linked to coronavirus is 12,868. That number doesn't include deaths in care homes or in the community in England and Northern Ireland. But NHS managers have struck a rather more optimistic note today. They say it's increasingly likely that the NHS will be able to cope with the peak in cases that is expected soon, because, they say, of good planning and lower than expected demand on intensive care. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has the latest.
It was his lifetime ambition, and Graham achieved it last November, co-piloting a plane, a gift from his family. At 77, he was still very active. He recently went to hospital with cancer. The family assumed Graham would come back home, but he never returned, having contracted COVID-19. His grandson's wife, Emma, who herself now has coronavirus, spoke of their sadness and frustration.
No one was there to hold his hand, and it's not the way you want to go. Only 10 people can go to the funeral, and we have a big family, so we can't go. And he can't get the send-off he truly deserves.
Finding a way out of the coronavirus crisis will depend largely on a big increase in testing. Ministers have called on academic and business laboratories to join a national effort to boost capacity. Some big companies have said they will help out, but one business manager with laboratories told us how he felt that his offer hadn't been taken up.
Understandably frustrated, a little unhappy. I mean, it would be very easy to sit and enjoy the sunshine and wait until things open up again. But, you know, I feel like I have a duty to the country and my team to keep them busy, to do something worthwhile.
The number of tests carried out each day hasn't gone up a lot, though there has been a bank holiday weekend. It stands at just under 16,000, but that's still a long way short of the 100,000 a day target set by the government by the end of this month, just 2 weeks away. NHS workers will be tested if they need it, including drive-through centres like this, letting them get back to work quickly if they test negative. That'll now apply to social care staff in measures for England announced today, following Wales a few weeks ago, including testing of care home residents and those returning from hospitals.
We will now ensure that everybody who has symptoms gets tested, and the critical other change is that those leaving hospital will now be tested, and they will be put into isolation until those test results come through.
How are you actually going to cover this large number of social care staff and NHS staff and hospital patients? How is it going to be achieved?
So now we have testing available right across the NHS and social care for all those who need it. And I'm very pleased we've been able to expand capacity so that that can happen. And as we build capacity further over this month and then beyond to that 100,000 a day target by the end of this month, we'll expand further.
He also said that relatives should be allowed to visit loved ones who are seriously ill with coronavirus for final farewells. The peak of pressure on the NHS was expected about now, with a surge in COVID-19 patients. Health leaders say there are still critical care beds to spare, and most hospitals appear to be coping, but the peak could last some time.
Well, we think we can say with increasing confidence that the NHS should be able to cope with this initial peak. The interesting thing, though, is there's now a whole load of new challenges the NHS faces, of which the very obvious one is if we're going to have this demand spread over a long period of time, how are we going to support our staff?
And there was uplifting news when Connie, aged 106, left hospital in Birmingham. She said she felt very lucky to have shaken off the virus. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
So, as we've heard, there's a new government promise that all residents and workers with symptoms in English care homes will now be tested, along with anyone returning to a care home from hospital. Although care home providers welcome the plans, many say that their calls for greater support in terms of staffing and training and specialist kit continue to be ignored. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt has been to hear firsthand how one care home in Essex is trying to cope.
Today at the St Ives Lodge care home in Chingford, they said goodbye to 6 of their elderly residents. 5 of the deaths were linked to COVID-19, the signs of its presence in the home marked out by the masked and gowned staff.
He had a brilliant knowledge of music and a great zest for life.
Each life lost a member of this family. A simple service to provide a few moments of reflection at a deeply distressing time for staff, residents and the families listening online. The home cares for 35 people, many with dementia. A resident returned from hospital with the virus. Had the testing announced today been available, it might have helped. But the manager says despite all their precautions, the virus spread quickly.
For the last 3 weeks, we've been like a little mini hospital where we've been dealing with end-of-life patients, relatives, people seeing their relatives at end of life, having to dress them all up in PPE before they can say goodbye. It's been so awful. I mean, it's awful. It's just surreal. It really is.
It's an experience that residential and nursing homes up and down the UK are now facing. In video diaries, staff here told us of the toll it's taking on them.
Recently, over the past few weeks, it's been very hard. Watching your residents get ill and dying, not being able to give your residents a hug or a kiss when they really need it.
We've lost a number of dear people to us. They become our family.
It's probably the hardest thing that I've ever had to do, to come to work and look after the people in this PPE, but unfortunately this is the situation at the moment and this is what we have to do.
Care homes like this welcome the government's strategy on social care as some recognition for what they're dealing with, but for many it's been too slow in coming and they want rapid action. Like many care homes, they say so far they've felt left on their own to deal with this crisis, struggling to get enough protective equipment, and even now, not all their staff can be tested at drive-through centres.
There's still 18 staff that haven't had any testing and can't have testing because they don't drive, and our residents haven't been tested, and I think we need that sort of as soon as possible because I think it will help massively in how we manage and quarantine different parts of the home.
And the staff here say they need to know that the promises made will lead to actual support.
This protective suit I'm wearing cannot shield humanity. Today I held their hand so they won't be alone.
Alison Holt, BBC News.
Let's start in Europe and Spain's death toll, which has passed 18,000 people. There is, however, some promising news because the rise in new infections has dropped to its lowest level since the nationwide lockdown there came into force last month. At its peak at the beginning of April, the daily death toll in Spain was close to 1,000. It has since fallen, with 567 deaths reported on Tuesday. The Spanish Prime Minister is saying that his country is still far from victory. Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid for us, where the lockdown measures have been eased very slightly.
We've seen the return to work of non-essential workers, people in the construction sector or manufacturing and other heavy industries since yesterday. As of today, the whole country has now finished its Easter holiday, so we're seeing the impact of that return to work. It has been criticised by some members of the opposition who say it's a risky move, it's even reckless. But Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has insisted that this decision has been taken, with full caution, and that the remainder of that lockdown, which has been in place for the last 4 weeks or so, is going to remain there. It's going to continue at least for another couple of weeks, probably more, and it's going to be very tightly policed.
So that's Guy Hedgecoe with the situation in Spain. Let's turn to Italy now. It does remain the worst hit country in Europe. More than 20,000 people have died there, but fewer people are dying each day now. And the number of patients in intensive care has dropped for 10 days in a row. The country remains in lockdown, but certain shops are allowed to reopen, and they include booksellers, stationery shops, also shops selling baby clothes. Mark Lowen reports from Rome.
A tiny step towards unlocking Italy. Camilla Cocchi's baby shop reopening today after 5 weeks as this country dips its toe back into normal life. A limited experiment to see how Italians react, with new rules on hygiene and limiting numbers inside.
We're really glad, really excited. Of course, it's not in normal times, so we are worried at the same time, but we have to work. We have bills to pay, we have rents to pay, we have wages to pay. Leaving your business that you started is like leaving your baby.
Customers too are adapting, welcoming a reward, but with apprehension.
I feel strange more for them, for the babies, for my children, but we have to be happy and somehow brave.
I'm really pleased, says 8-year-old Irena, because I haven't been out since the 4th of March. I'm emotional.
Italy found itself as the testing ground for the rest of the world for how to respond to this outbreak and how to lock down a country. And now once again it's an experiment of how to ease those restrictions. The hope here is that it doesn't become an example of reopening too soon and the virus spiking again. It is a risk that this country is taking.
Our thanks to Mark there. Well, computer production and also paper manufacturing have also been allowed to restart. Jean Mackenzie is also in Rome.
Factories have been putting a lot of pressure on the government to allow them to restart. The government has said it will look over the next couple of weeks to see if some factories could reopen, but it's going to be led by the health situation. And in fact, today they've introduced even stricter restrictions on people coming into the country from abroad. So you can now only travel into Italy for health or for work reasons, and people coming into the country will have their temperatures checked before they get onto planes. And once they arrive, they'll have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, regardless of whether or not they've got symptoms. This is really Italy now trying to protect itself from the rest of the world.
Now, interestingly, the restrictions in Italy are differing from region to region, with some areas like Lombardy in the north, the epicenter of the country's crisis, deciding to keep shops shut. So not a uniform picture there. The European Commission is urging EU countries to coordinate any plans to gradually ease restrictions. They're warning that even phased measures will lead to a corresponding increase in new cases. Around the continent, Denmark plans to ease its lockdown faster than originally planned and plans to reopen schools for younger children. Poland says that it will gradually lift restrictions on its economy from Sunday, and Austria, which was one of the first countries in Europe to impose a strict lockdown, is also now allowing places like garden centres, hardware stores and also small shops to reopen. Bethany Bell is in Vienna.
Shoppers have cautiously welcomed the move.
I hope that it will go well and that the number of cases won't jump up again. But it's good to do something to help the economy.
I think it's good. You have to stay at home and there's plenty to do in the garden.
Hopefully people will stick to the rules so we can stimulate the economy.
Things may be easing up a bit here slightly, but there's strict safety rules when it comes to shopping. You can't go inside a shop unless you're wearing a basic face mask like this, covering your nose and mouth. And once you're inside a shop, you have to keep your distance.
With hospitals across the country facing a crush of patients with COVID-19, both routine medical visits and surgeries that would have been urgent at any other time are now taking a back seat as many local and state health authorities put a halt to non-emergency procedures. And now some doctors fear that some of those delayed medical treatments could have their own devastating toll. ABC's Will Carr has this story.
The
behind the doctors and the nurses on the front lines, another medical crisis is about to explode.
He did have several blood clots.
It's a ticking time bomb. You may end up seeing a lot more, people who may suffer. Either they may die or they may end up having morbidity. They may end up getting issues which should have been addressed and handled right now, and we are pushing them.
With so many hospital resources concentrating on the COVID-19 crisis, many local health departments have ordered a ban on non-essential surgeries, pushing serious medical procedures back, some indefinitely.
You're concerned that more people could die by not getting the surgeries they need right now than from the coronavirus.
The longer we go now, no question about it. No question about this. In the San Francisco area, no question about this.
Medicines we give you to stop it.
Dr. Philip Theodosopoulos is treating Rosemary Pathy McKinney at UCSF in the Bay Area. Rosemary has 2 brain tumors.
It's just this constant head pressure, so it's always on my mind. It's just the fear of the unknown.
They were supposed to operate in March to remove one tumor and find out if both are cancerous. But the day before surgery, with her head shaved, because of that city order, Rosemary and her husband Rick were told they have to wait.
We're gonna cancel all the elective surgeries. And I said, well, she's having brain surgery. This is not elective. Nobody elects to have brain surgery, right? This is not a facelift.
In hospitals across the country, patients with critical life and death issues are being pushed to the top of the list for surgeries. Dr. Anu Shah, New Jersey, worries about the other surgeries being delayed.
In the gray zone are urgent procedures which should be done within like 1 or 2 weeks, and those are not being done.
We usually do at Parnassus, which is our main hospital, we do about 70 operations a day. That's altogether all services. And we're down to about 8. 8.
In Washington State, Liz Rayburn suffers from tremors. She's undergoing deep brain stimulation, which requires 2 surgeries. In the middle of her first, while she was awake on the operating table, she says she found out the plan for the second changed.
My neurosurgeon, who's standing right behind me, said, Liz, I have some good news and I have some bad news. And I said, hit it. He said, the good news is that we're done and it has gone very well. The bad news is that your second surgery has just been indefinitely postponed.
Adding to the stress, patients like Rosemary, who's thankful to have had a successful brain surgery Monday, can't have their families with them before, during, or after their procedures.
I will hold her hand when she goes to sleep, and I will be there for her when she wakes up, and all of our folks. But that's tough. That's really tough.
Tough indeed. And Will Carr joins us now. Will, how are these patients that you spoke with coping with these delayed procedures? And how are the doctors and hospitals deciding who gets to the front of the line?
Well, Lindsay, it's a healthy balancing act. They're trying to weigh those critical surgeries that people need versus keeping all the facilities, the hospitals across the country safe. As for the patients we've been talking to, they're all taking it in stride. You heard from Liz with the trimmer. She has to have a couple devices installed during her surgeries, and she's keeping a healthy sense of humor. She told me that she's looking forward to being a functional cyborg, which really cracked me up. It also made her husband laugh, who was also her photographer because of our technical difficulties. So she was definitely keeping a good sense of humor.
And as hospitals try to get through the immediate crisis, what are doctors saying some of the long-term consequences of these delayed surgeries could be?
One doctor tells me that right now they have a backlog of surgeries with their caseload of 6 months. He says that's right now. His biggest concern is what that backlog will turn into as this crisis continues to move forward. Another doctor tells me his biggest concern is economic. All the hospitals across the country plan in their budgets these surgeries, the money that comes from these surgeries. He's worried that on the back end of this crisis, the very men and women who are on the front lines right now could see pay cuts or even layoffs. Lindsay.
All right, Will Carr, thanks to you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
As we've been reporting, it's all hands on deck at hospitals and clinics across the country these days. But as governors call for reinforcements, thousands of healthcare workers in the U.S. under the DACA program face the possibility of losing their jobs and even getting deported if a critical Supreme Court decision doesn't go their way in the coming weeks. Here's ABC's Devin Dwyer.
I've been working since 6:30 this morning. It is right now 12:30 at night.
For Florida paramedic Aldo Martinez, long days and high stress are the new normal.
It's been about 18 hours of call after call. You can even see it on my cheeks, the redness from the mask, the N95 masks that we have to wear.
Martinez is one of an estimated nearly 30,000 immigrant physicians, nurses, technicians, and aides who have U.S. work permits through DACA. The program started by President Obama that grants temporary legal status to undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. as children. Martinez was born in Mexico.
If somebody from your family was having a heart attack or a stroke or had just had an accident, and now we have 27,000 people less to respond to those kind of emergencies. Just something to think about.
Those immigrant workers on the front line now facing an uncertain future after President Trump canceled DACA in 2017, threatening to end work permits and worse for the more than 650,000 who enrolled in the program.
Every day I wake up with the uncertainty, not knowing if DACA will end or if I may be deported, and that's a hard reality to face.
Denise Rojas is a medical student at Mount Sinai, now helping COVID patients in New York City.
What I do know is at this very moment, I can be of help in this crisis, and that's what I intend to keep on doing.
In Rhode Island, that passion driving DACA recipient Crissia Rivera, a third-year med student at Brown.
I've been helping at my local Department of Health to help call patients who test positive and call their close contacts to make sure that they're doing well.
And in California, there's Dr. Nuleta Vongskorn, the first undocumented immigrant to graduate from the University of California, San Francisco Medical School.
It is just yet another example of how immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, certainly DACA recipients, continue to show up and do what we can to be a part of this country.
The fate of DACA and those essential health workers that rely on it rests here at the Supreme Court. It's closed during the pandemic, but the justices expected to hand down a decision any day.
If the Supreme Court would uphold the decision to cancel DACA and my DACA ends in August 2020, I will be left with the question of whether or not I will complete my residency training.
Dr. Leta Vongskorn and other DACA recipients have written the justices to factor the pandemic into their imminent decision and throw a lifeline to immigrants on the front line.
These are people who are actually on the front lines. There are some 200 of them that are practicing doctors. There are statistics that show that every doctor treats around 5,000 patients per year. Multiply that by 200, and in a pandemic like this, doctors are treating a lot more.
The Departments of Justice and Homeland Security both declined comment to ABC News on the role of DACA recipients responding to COVID-19 and whether they've studied the impact ending DACA would have on the U.S. health system.
Every single one of these professionals right now is precious to our systems. It is absolutely not appropriate to say that these people should put their lives on the line for the rest of the country, only to have their fate hanging in the balance.
The president says DACA is unconstitutional. Congress could enact a solution, but has repeatedly failed to do so. That leaves the Supreme Court in the tricky spot of deciding what's next.
They need to understand that we are essential, that we are productive, and we provide for this country, for the people that they love, for the people that we love.
A plea for empathy and understanding.
If the Supreme Court decides to eliminate the program and Congress doesn't act to pass the legislation for us, it would put my career as a physician at a stall.
So much on the line while the fight against COVID-19 goes on.
I continue to chug along with my community and just hope for the best, because sometimes that's all you have is hope.
For ABC News Live, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington.
Really important storyline there. Our thanks to Devin.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
For the carers in this nursing home, these are long, dark days.
How are you feeling?
Those struck down with COVID-19 are helpless. This man, like so many others, struggles to breathe. There are no ventilators here. The care home's owners have been hit hard, like so many others. 55 cases here now, and 13 deaths in just under 2 weeks.
Unless you've been in carer's shoes, I don't think anybody really understands how difficult it is on a daily basis.
We were on the same ward on Saturday and told the story of a man called John. 2 days after this was filmed, he passed away. John Allison was 76 and had until recently worked as a driver delivering prescriptions in his community. Described by his family as a kind and gentle man. He died in his room with a nurse by his side.
It's just so sad that we've not been able to give him a hug. We've not been able to say a proper goodbye to him. We sat there at home just wanting to be here, and it's sad that the first time that I am here is after he's gone.
The care sector has been crying out for tests for staff, residents and discharges from hospital. From what we have seen from spending time inside this nursing home is that tests are key. Without them, care providers say they are working in the dark, not knowing who has coronavirus and who hasn't. And now the Health Secretary has said tests are on their way. Can you just be specific, Secretary of State, about numbers? There are 1.6 million people working in social care, all doing a very difficult job, potentially all needing tests. How many tests have you put aside for social care? And what is the time scale that you promise to deliver them in?
At the moment, we have spare capacity in the thousands, and the capacity is ramping up to, as I say, 100,000 a day by the end of the month. The vast majority of that increase will be for the NHS and social care as a whole.
Nursing homes are now in a race against time because as each day passes, the situation gets worse. And as we filmed inside, another life was lost to this disease.
Over the past 4 days, every shift that I've been on, we've lost somebody, unfortunately. It's just sad, it's awful. It's awful for families, staff. This COVID-19, it's just destroyed people, families included. And again, just towards me a tiny bit.
They are exhausted and they are drained. But these carers carry on, even in the face of unimaginable horror.
Okay.
Nick Martin, Sky News, Sheffield.
In listening mode to over 100 local government leaders on the coronavirus front line.
And we've got Sky with us for the first few contributions.
Sky News joined a video call revealing the challenges of the ongoing lockdown. First, the care sector.
My borough has got a workforce of about 5,000. We were offered 10 tests. It's just not happened.
Then on council finances.
Ministers have said to us overtly 3 or 4 times, don't worry, spend what it takes, we will reimburse you. And we started to hear in the last few days, and particularly a very concerning call with Nick, the Secretary of State, and some other senior council leaders yesterday, ministers start to backtrack on that commitment rapidly.
On homelessness.
The government were very clear that whatever it cost, they wanted us to put people up in hotels. We did suffer from a bit of a lack of joined up approach, because at the same time as government was saying that, they were also asking hotels to close.
And supplies for the vulnerable.
Many of the food that was being delivered was either out of date or close to being out of date. Mouldy bread has been being delivered to residents, which clearly is a real concern.
And what was the lesson from the discussion?
The government has put a lot of schemes in place, and the question is how they're being implemented, and is there a gap? And we heard about real gaps. One of the starkest that I heard, there was Enfield there. Enfield Council got 5,000 people working in the care sector, and they've only had 10 tests.
Opposing may be easy, but deciding is difficult. Does the Labour leader think that ministers are going to have to make trade-offs, for instance, between young and old?
Well, I don't think there'll be trade-offs as such. What we've got a duty to do is to keep everybody safe and well. That may be putting in different support for different sectors, of course, but it's not really about a trade-off.
But British politicians never like to acknowledge the trade-offs that they make in public when they come to a decision. And we've seen that time and again from politicians, Conservative as well as now Labour. But the thing about the coronavirus conundrum is that there are so many of them. The state of the economy under lockdown versus the health of the nation, the young versus the old. That's why one cabinet minister said to me it was going to take weeks to work out how to convince the public that it might be safe to come out of lockdown. The chief medical officer today saying that we are reaching the peak, but that might not be enough.
At the moment, we are not yet at the point where we can say confidently and safely, this is now past the peak and we can start thinking very much about the next phases.
Tomorrow, a meeting of COBRA likely to decide to continue lockdown until at least the end of April. Life slowing, but ministers need to stop too much coming to a complete halt. Sam Coates, Sky News.
No one can leave for the mainland and no one can come in.
Approximately 1/2 of the island population is infected.
The infection rate per capita is one of the highest in Europe, if not in the world.
What's it like to be on the Corona Island?
This is Saaremaa, an island off the coast of Estonia, and about 33,000 people live there. What happened a month ago, a team from Milan flew to play volleyball on the island, and now it's the country's coronavirus hotspot. We can't get there, so some of the islanders filmed on their mobiles what it's like coping there now.
The COVID-19 infection situation in Saaremaa and Kuressaare is quite serious. We might have 1,000 hospitalizations by April 20th. So we need help. In our hospital we have 147 beds. This is not enough for 1,000 patients.
With the high number of cases, some patients are now being flown to the mainland for treatment. Elsewhere on the island, people are adapting quickly. Hundreds of companies are finding ways to survive online.
Hello world, Susan here from Saaremaa.
Susan Reinholm used to work in an office for a cooperative selling the island's produce. Now she's delivering door to door.
The pile of things you see behind there, these are the home deliveries that I have to go and deliver today. So we are now in one of the neighborhoods here in Kuressaare, Saaremaa's capital, as we can say. And I'm waiting for our client to come downstairs, and then I'll leave the groceries to her safely without any contact.
With all non-essential business shut, many of Susan's friends lost work after the outbreak, but quickly found it elsewhere.
And people adapt to change. For example, my hairdresser is now the one labeling the packages in a local meat factory, and nobody's sitting at home and thinking that, okay, let's see what tomorrow brings. People are taking actions.
Anu Vores is part of the island's crisis centre. They're considering the next steps in a video conference. Anu tells us they've been through isolation like this before.
For the very first time since Soviet occupation, people need permits to enter. But this time it is because of our free will to protect our people and their health. It is difficult to tell how the coronavirus first came to the island. There were 2 volleyball matches with the Italian team that brought together more than 1,000 local people as well as visitors from the mainland Estonia.
Local officials also say a second big social gathering, this champagne festival, may have further quickened the spread. Another islander, Tom O'Verkey, films for us how his hometown has changed.
On the background is the main square of Kuressaare, which is usually buzzing around midday like now. Today there are of course nobody. People are at their homes, working online. I'm a bit worried about the longer term implications, of course. And what I've seen so far, how the people are getting together to kind of work for the future of the island, I'm really positively surprised.
46 days. That's how long it's been since the first reported coronavirus death in this country, a man in his 50s in Washington state. And since that time, countless lives have been saved. Perhaps Senator Chuck Schumer said it best when he said, sometimes heroes don't wear capes, some wear masks and scrubs. In these 46 days, we've seen some truly heroic work from those working on the front lines. But also in that month and a half since that first death, more than 27,000 Americans have passed away from the virus. Tonight, there are more than 619,000 cases here in the U.S. And in the same 46-day time period, we've all tried to adjust with varying success to this new normal. Today, researchers at Harvard said without a vaccine, we should be prepared to keep social distancing intermittently until 2022. And in these 46 days, Americans have had to make some life-changing decisions, among them grappling with elderly loved ones in assisted living and nursing homes and their well-being. Our Kaylee Hartung leads us off tonight with a closer look at nursing homes, so many of which are on the front lines of this pandemic.
These scenes strike fear in anyone with someone they love inside a nursing home. The National Guard suited up head to toe with protective gear, testing elderly residents at one Boston facility. The risk COVID-19 poses to the greatest generation clear since that first deadly outbreak in Washington state. For Deborah de Los Angeles, painfully obvious since she woke up to a voicemail on March 4th, delivering devastating news.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe she was gone.
Her mother, Twyla June Morin, died that morning at Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington.
Your mother was totally dependent on Life Care, and you feel like Life Care failed her.
Yeah, I do, and not just her.
At least 40 COVID-19 deaths are now linked to this one facility. We were there as the horror began to quickly unfold.
In the U.S. for the first time, the person who died, a man from Washington state in his 50s with underlying health conditions.
The CDC is sending a team here to Washington state to help investigate a potential outbreak among the high-risk population at this nursing home.
Later that day, we'd just seen another person loaded up into this ambulance to be taken to the hospital. Susan Haley, a resident at Life Care, telling us what it feels like to be inside.
Do I want to leave? Yes, absolutely yes. It's not that the people aren't nice, it's that I don't like being trapped.
Families frustrated, begging for answers, feeling helpless as they wait for test kits to show up.
We have limited resources to battle this disease, and I think somebody somewhere decided that this population of people wasn't worth wasting resources on.
The fear and anguish we saw in Kirkland has now spread nationwide.
It's confusing. I will say that it's confusing, but I don't know what happened.
In Massachusetts, at least 38 veterans at the Holyoke Soldiers Home have died with the virus. The situation's so alarming, federal authorities are investigating. 46% of the COVID deaths in that state are residents of adult care facilities. In New York State, as of Tuesday, at least 2,722 people have died in nursing homes and adult care facilities with COVID-19. There are positive cases in more than half the state's licensed homes.
Nursing homes have been an increasing issue because that is the vulnerable population in the vulnerable place.
And in Richmond, Virginia, now the deadliest single nursing home outbreak in the country. 45 people have died at the Canterbury Rehabilitation and Healthcare Center, and officials expect more people to die there.
To see a resident pass and to have nothing that you can do to prevent that from happening other than offering comfort and palliative care is traumatic. I mean, there's nothing but trauma when that happens. Every death We die a little bit with every death that occurs in our facility.
Nationwide, ABC News has learned that more than 3,880 nursing home residents have died with COVID-19. And that number is based on just 13 states that are tracking nursing home deaths. Just yesterday, the CDC, FEMA, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services finalized a plan for nursing homes to report COVID-19 data to the National Healthcare Safety Network. 6 weeks after her mother's death in Washington state, this news came as a shock to Deborah De Los Angeles.
They should have been talking about this in February, not April.
Deborah's now filed the first wrongful death suit in the COVID crisis against LifeCare. The complaint citing an investigation by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that concluded the facility failed to report an outbreak of respiratory illness to local authorities for 17 days and gave inadequate care to their residents during the outbreak. LifeCare, the largest privately owned long-term facility chain in the United States, is facing a fine of more than $600,000 from CMS.
LifeCare's a huge corporation and they should know better. They should just know better.
I know nothing can bring your mother back, but what do you hope this lawsuit brings?
Mostly to make nursing homes to do the right thing by their residents, do the right thing by their staff, because they're just as much, they might be younger and healthier, but they're still vulnerable.
And the staff at LifeCare telling ABC affiliate Como they did their best to try to manage an unimaginable situation.
Within 4 days, we lost 48 staff. We have about 170 staff. So within 4 days, you lose that many staff. It is next to impossible. In the next about 7 days, we lost another 32 staff.
We're all humans, so I think everyone is afraid, especially in the beginning when nobody's familiar truly with what's going on.
In a statement, LifeCare tells ABC News, "Our hearts go out to this family and the loss they have suffered during this unprecedented viral outbreak. We are unable to comment on specific legal cases that are pending, but we wish this and all families peace. The loss of any of our residents at LifeCare Center of Kirkland is felt deeply by us." Staff there continuing to care for the 32 residents who remain. But this nursing home in Riverside, California, was forced to evacuate its 84 patients.
The majority of the staff failed to show up for work, and indicating that they were fearful of their safety.
The head of the American Healthcare Association warning the country about what's to come.
There has to be a sense of national urgency around this, with the country galvanizing around helping long-term care facilities in the same way that it did hospitals. This is a crisis. It has already been bad. It will be much worse if we don't surround these facilities with the help and with the support that they need.
But now across America, the new reality. Families grappling with how to stay connected with those they love while also keeping them safe.
It's painful when you can't be with the one you love.
Judy Irish has been visiting her husband Bob at this nursing home in Wisconsin, but those visits look like this.
It has to be strict so no one gets it. There is no one in the nursing home with it at this point. And I feel it has to stay that way. So I guess we have to do what we have to do, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
A sacrifice Judy and so many families must make.
Not easy, that is to be sure. And Kaylee Hartung joins us now. Kaylee, what a heartbreaking struggle for these families and a difficult challenge for the facilities that are trying to isolate while still remaining connected to the outside world.
That's right, Lindsay. And these facilities across the country are really locked down now. And one of the biggest challenges they're facing is the same broader challenge we're facing as a society. And that is the point of transmission is so often unclear. At LifeCare Center in Kirkland, they still don't know how the virus infiltrated its walls. I was tested positive for the virus. I don't know specifically how I contracted it. Now, I'm one of the 80% of people who were lucky enough to only experience mild symptoms with the virus, but for people in these nursing homes who already have weakened immune systems, who have underlying medical conditions, those are the people who this virus is ravaging. And they are already in these environments, Lindsay, where once that virus gets inside, it can spread like wildfire.
Right. All right. Kaylee Hartung, our thanks to you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
The red heartbeat of New York flashing out over a population sheltered indoors. Good evening once again, day 1182 of the Trump administration. 202 days remain until our presidential election. At the White House today, nothing but rosy scenarios in the Rose Garden. The president says, quote, a lot of good things are happening. He is determined to start opening the country again. Today, he said 20 states are doing better. Then he increased the number on the fly to 29. That, of course, is well over half the states in our country. He said, we're a country that's getting better, and he is going to clear some states to open, as he continues to call it, before May 1st. Where the states are concerned, he said, quote, we have the right to do whatever we want. In other news, and we'll have more on this in a moment, he says he doesn't know anything about his name needing to appear on those IRS checks that are going out. And he slipped a bit of news into today's briefing. The U.S. is about to send ventilators to Russia. As we let all that settle in, let's check back in with the real world, shall we? This was the deadliest day thus far for this epidemic in the U.S., with 2,492 new deaths. 2,492. Tonight, more than 32,000 Americans have lost their lives. And despite the self-congratulation at the White House, we have crossed an important milestone. We've now tested 1% of our U.S. population. Another way of putting this is, if we start testing 1 million Americans a day for the next year, we would then know with something closer to certainty how many Americans have this virus. Worldwide, cases now closing in on 2 million. Tonight we have breaking news of the grisly and sad variety as well. It's from the New York area. The New York Times reporting that police in the small town of Andover, New Jersey, quote, discovered 17 bodies piled inside a nursing home in a small morgue intended to hold no more than 4 people. This is a nursing home where several previous deaths had been linked to coronavirus. Today, the president spent a lot of his briefing blaming Senate Democrats for the vacancies in his administration, positions he says are critical to combating the spread of the virus. He urged the Senate to adjourn so he can use recess appointments to install nominees, a move that would no doubt provoke a confrontation with Congress, which is out of town until May 4th.
Many positions that are unstaffed because we can't get the approvals. The Democrats are holding us up. We cannot get approval. We've gotten judges because we go through the process. The Senate should either fulfill its duty and vote on my nominees, or it should formally adjourn so that I can make recess appointments. We have a tremendous number of people that have to come into government, and now more so than ever before because of the virus and the problem. We have to do it.
Aside from the obvious constitutional issues, the Senate is controlled by the Republican Party. Tonight, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also issued a statement reiterating nominees will need consent from Democrats. Trump also previewed his effort to issue guidelines for governors to reopen their economies, and he seemed to imply that the U.S. was so flush with medical supplies, we can now start sending them abroad.
We'll also be speaking to America's governors tomorrow, and then we'll be announcing exactly what's happening. You already know we'll be opening up states, some states much sooner than others. And we think some of the states can actually open up before the deadline of May 1st. Governors are looking forward. They're chomping at the bit to get going. We're going to be helping other nations. We're going to be helping Italy, Spain, France, other nations. And we're going to be helping them strongly. I think Russia is going to need ventilators. They're having a hard time in Moscow.
So there that was. While Trump announced that the U.S. had passed the peak on new cases, Dr. Deborah Birx was more cautious in her assessment.
We've seen declines in cases across the country. We are remaining concerned, and we've been having discussions with Rhode Island. Rhode Island and Providence are in a unique situation. First, they had increasing cases from the New York City area, and now they have new increasing cases from the Boston area. We see as a country we're improving. We see as metro areas we're improving. We see as communities, as counties, and as states we're improving. But that also still requires everyone to continue to social distance.
Today, Michigan's governor was the target of demonstrators who rallied at the state capitol protesting Governor Whitmer's stay-at-home orders. We'll have more on that later in the broadcast. Protesters in Kentucky also gathered at that state capitol to object to their governor's emergency measures. Meanwhile, the virus has spread into more of rural America. There are concerns that few communities will be able to handle a possible onslaught of cases on the local level. One of the other consequences of this, the rise in cases at meat processing plants. Smithfield, leading U.S. pork processor, says employees at their facilities in Wisconsin, Missouri, and South Dakota have tested positive. That has raised concerns about the meat supply. Today, the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, tried to reassure the public.
There's been a lot happening this week. It's COVID-19 is impacting food processing facilities, as you know. For Americans who may be worried about access to good food because of this, I want to assure you the American food supply is strong, resilient, and safe.
Meanwhile, millions of out-of-work Americans are in desperate need of help, and that number is expected to grow by about another 5 million when the new unemployment numbers come out tomorrow. That would bring our total now to a number north of 22 million. That would be more people than live in the state of Florida. Relief checks will soon be in the mail for those without direct deposit capability, and they will all have the president's name written on the checks. He was asked about that unprecedented move today.
Why did you have your name added to these coronavirus relief checks?
Well, I don't know too much about it, but I understand my name is there. I don't know where they're going, how they're going. I do understand it's not delaying anything, and I'm satisfied with that. I don't imagine it's a big deal. I'm sure people will be very happy to get a big, fat, beautiful check, and my name is on it.
Help for small businesses also in peril. The Washington Post reporting the Small Business Administration was expected to run out of funds by day's end. Then there's this graph from the New York Times, a stark visualization of what's happening to the nation's retail and food sales. It's worse than any previous recession levels. Even as some Republicans are pressing the president to get the economy reopened now, it seems business leaders disagree. The president spoke with CEOs this afternoon. People familiar with the call telling the Wall Street Journal, quote, banking and financial services executives said the administration needed to dramatically increase the availability of coronavirus testing before the public would be confident enough to return to work, eat at restaurants, or shop in retail establishments.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Right now we're seeing record death tolls in New York City. What does that mean for funeral directors in the state and in the city?
And we have this incredible amount of volume of death that's taking place right now, and it takes time to treat somebody with dignity and respect after they've passed, to prepare them for a viewing, to bury them properly, to cremate them. The the sheer volume is just working against us because we don't have enough time.
This is, again, really new for people, even just in terms of the pandemic. It's a crisis. It feels very scary, especially in New York City. What's the worst case scenario in the city right now?
The worst case scenario is probably playing out right now, actually, as we speak. It's just that high number of deaths that are taking place and just having the system at its max capacity where it's just really hard to keep up with the number of deaths that are occurring. So what that's causing is when a family member calls a funeral home, many of them are just at capacity right now because they're waiting for the ability to have someone they're helping now be buried or be cremated.
What does the strain look like?
We have funeral homes that help about 100 families on average a year. We have some funeral homes in the city who in the last week or so have helped 40, 50, 60 families already. So imagine doing half of your year's business in a week's period of time.
What are you hearing from folks that you've either worked with in the past or that you that your association works with? What are you hearing from folks?
I've spoken to a couple of funeral homes recently who say their average day right now is 7 a.m. to 1 a.m., just taking enough time to sleep and rest a little bit. I had one funeral director tell me that he lost 13 pounds in the past week just from trying to, make sure that he's doing what he's doing for families. And I think the stress of it all is making it that much harder. As of right now, we are only allowed to bring in immediate family members for a private gathering, but when they come in, they have to maintain the 6 feet social distancing mandates. So it's hard for me to even imagine what a family member is feeling after losing someone. If I was with my sister in a funeral home because my mom passed away and I couldn't get close to my sister to hug her, I couldn't imagine. People don't like to talk about death, but we've seen it front and center, unfortunately, in the pandemic. And funeral directors really are that last responder. They are on the front lines right now trying to help families. So I think it's just really important that folks remember that when they see somebody who is a funeral director trying to help a family.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
The city where it all began is back up on its feet again. The last patients left this field hospital in Wuhan, and the facility has now shut. China is slowly moving on from a crisis that America is still in the thick of, and Donald Trump is looking for someone to blame.
I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus.
The backlash has been swift. Bill Gates, the WHO's second largest donor, tweeted to say that halting funding for the World Health Organization during a world health crisis is as dangerous as it sounds. And the Director General of the WHO made his feelings perfectly clear.
We regret the decision of the President of the United States to order a hold in funding to the World Health Organization. This is a time for all of us to be united in our common struggle against a common threat, a dangerous enemy.
There is another angle to all this, and that is Donald Trump's dislike of the United Nations. And the fact that he's chosen now to have this battle with the WHO shows really the failure of the UN to have any kind of real influence during this global pandemic. The White House hasn't decided how or when it will cut off funding, and the WHO says it doesn't know yet what the effect of it will be. But you don't lose your biggest donor and just carry on as normal.
WHO had no independent means to check what China was doing. China would not let it on the ground. And so should WHO have praised China? Maybe not. But at the same time, remember, President Trump was also praising China just as effusively.
The WHO isn't the first multinational organization to feel Donald Trump's anger, but never has the US president chosen his timing quite like this. If Trump wanted impact, he's got it. If he wanted support, he hasn't. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, New York.